Hi, guys. My name is Joe, and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. This is a segment that I call Tangent Tuesday, where I pick a topic and just talk about it. So, I decided to go for kind of a fun one this week, this month, second Tuesday of every month. And I was thinking about all the different martial arts things that I watched growing up. And one of the first ones that comes to mind was Kung Fu, The Legend Continues, which of course was a sequel to the original Kung Fu TV show that came out in the 70s. I hadn't seen that at this time. David Carradine came back. He played the role of Kwai Chan Caine, the grandson, and it was set in modern times. And his son, who he had become separated from years earlier, had become a cop. So this was like my first real exposure to Chinese martial arts, even though it was very fanciful. But most of the stuff, the books I had read had been like karate, judo, traditional jujitsu. My first martial art had been karate, and of course, the likes of Chuck Norris and Jean Claude Van Damme had very much that Japanese style. And Chuck Norris's style is Korean, but it's Korean where they copied directly from the Japanese. So Tang Sudo is Korean Shotokan. Anyway, so seeing David Carradine, he was using a lot of open hand strikes and a lot of crescent kicks, and I think part of that, looking back on it, was just his age. But was also a lot of like the accoutrement, like the silk uniform and the whole, Shaolin tiger and dragon motifs. So that got my attention, and it got me actually into, buying Inside Kung Fu magazine, and from there I wound up buying a lot of Chinese martial arts books. So that was how that influenced me, and I part of the appeal of that show, even though it got like way into the realms of fantasy, like I think in the second season he beats a guy by like turning into four different Kwai Chang Caines and surrounding the guy. Yeah, that's not going to happen. But there was sort of this element of, like Kwai Chang Caine was very unbothered by everything going on around him and had these, expressions for people to listen to. And, he had wisdom. And I'm like, I don't want to be like that. I want to live a stress free life and have all the answers and also be able to, like, palm strike someone through a wall. So that was one of the first ones I was exposed to. Um, there was also uh, Vanishing Sun, which also featured Chinese martial arts that had a younger cast. It started off as like four TV movies and eventually got a one season series. It starred Russell Wong, who to this day is still one of my favorite guys to watch in fight scenes. And again, there was that element of Chinese martial arts, but he was younger and more spry than David Carradine was when he was doing, The Legend Continues. But it still had sort of that philosophical connection because the episodes were bookended with parables. Originally they had like an unseen figure just reciting them. Eventually, they got Russell Wong to actually do the voiceovers for those. So again, we're sort of connecting philosophy with martial arts, which I thought was cool. I heard he did one later called Black Sash, which is weird on a number of levels because historically Chinese martial arts haven't had colored belt ranks. But I sort of wish I'd seen that because, again, I like watching Russell Wong do kung fu. There was also Highlander, which ostensibly is sort of like a fantasy series set in modern day because the background of it is, there are these chosen immortals throughout time, and they don't age and they don't get hurt, but they have to duel each other and cut off each other's heads. But I would consider definitely the sword work a martial element, and I think Adrian Paul, the lead, I think his sword background was primarily Kumdo, which is a Korean sword art. But we also saw, you know, historical European martial arts. He had a really good, really cinematic fight scene with Anthony DeLongis, where they were doing rapier and parrying dagger. You know, supposedly in the Spanish style. I don't know enough about sword fighting to recognize that one way or another, but it was really cool. You know, and of course they featured other weapons. You know, axes and pole arms and various sabers and straight swords. So on top of that, Duncan MacLeod, the main character, had a very strong moral center that, frankly, usually got him into more trouble, maybe than it should have. But conflict creates drama, so that's what you needed for the TV show to happen. But if we look at this as a martial arts uh, genre instead of focusing on the fantasy elements, so we have a very moral character, and we have the sword fighting martial element to it. Some other things, WMAC Masters, which I would say was more for fun. For those who never watched WMAC Masters, this was in the 90s. It basically played out like a video game with real people. So you had these primary characters, and they all had these nicknames like, Hakeem the Machine Alston. One of them was named Yin Yang Man. There was another guy who was Tiger Claw. And it was a setup so that it was like a competition, but everybody was friendly because it was oriented towards kids. And of course, there was a moral at the end of every episode. But it was really focused a lot on the action. And you would have two parts to the tournament. You'd have four guys selected each week, and they would be put into a set that was like, an Old West set, but they would be attacked by ninjas. And after they beat up the ninjas and got a little beat up themselves, I think they actually had like health bars showing on there. The ninjas would leave and they would fight each other. And, whoever won each event would face each other at the end. And, that was really cool as far as action went. So that probably inspired me to do a lot of fancy kicks against trees when I was growing up. Other things I would consider probably more honorable mention. Mark Dacascos was in an adaptation of The Crow for television. And again, Mark Dacascos is one of those guys like I love watching this guy do fight scenes. I also like the acting that I have seen him in. I'm going to sort of hedge my bets, and I don't know if he's a great actor, but I do like seeing him. But he played the part of the Crow, Eric Draven, who he and his girlfriend were murdered, and then he came back from the dead to avenge her. And of course, in order to make that a series, they had to stretch things out a bit and mess with the lore a little. But it was really fun to watch. Well, it was really fun to watch the fight scenes. You know what? Who am I kidding? It was fun getting into like the weird lore stuff because apparently he killed a bad guy in the wrong way and he came back as a snake instead of a crow or something. Yeah. But yeah, Mark Dacascos and fight scenes, never long enough, and the more I've heard about television production, like, man, you got a week and we got to do 2 fight scenes for this episode. So you each get 5 things you get to do. And it's got to be wrapped up in 30 seconds. So I feel a little bit bad we didn't get to see more of him in that. What else? Oh yeah, Time Trax. I had Time Trax on here. Time Trax was a fun TV show. The basic plot was that a cop from the future came to our time, the 1990s, to go track down a bunch of criminals who had escaped to the past. And the martial arts in that fascinated me. There was a martial art called Mosh T, that not Tay, T, and this was their stance. Their on guard position, had their hands out like this. Looking back on it, it's introduced to us as an Occidental improvement on martial arts. I'm like, looking back at that sounds a little bit racist. But yeah, it was cool to see some of the fight scenes. I remember there were a lot of close range strikes, like, knees and elbows and like hook punches to the body. And I remember sometimes he would like put someone in a lock in order to position them to throw strikes. I'm like, "Hey, that's kind of cool." So that was another one that I watched. What else? You guys have probably seen, if you watch my Media Fight Mondays, I've got a few Star Trek fight scenes from like the 90s Star Treks. So like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. And that sort of fascinates me because you can clearly tell in universe that Starfleet has a very specific fighting system. And again, growing up in the 90s, as a teenager, I'm watching these guys. First of all, they would use this a lot, sometimes to hit sideways. Okay, not so bad. But sometimes they'd hit directly down. Don't ever do that. The first time I tried that was on like the dashboard of a car, and like all the insides of my fingers banged together. It was painful, and I wouldn't do that to myself if I were trying to hurt somebody. There were also a lot of like elbow strikes and palm strikes, and so again, not really a martial arts show, but it featured martial arts, and I thought that was kind of cool. So anyway, those are the things that I watched in the 90s. Excuse me. That sort of, got my imagination going, got me interested in various types of martial arts. Let's see if that actually works. Or, oh, Chinese martial arts. How can I find out more about that? So yeah, all I got. Thanks for following along, and I'll see you guys later.